Hey everybody, this video is going to explain the handout here on the tab for useful words for grammar and mechanics. This handout is really more of a tool or a resource for you because it contains three lists or groups of different types of words that can be helpful when you're working on identifying and fixing certain types of grammar and mechanics errors. Specifically sentence fragments and run-on sentences and comma splices, which are the two lessons that follow this handout. The first will be on sentence fragments, and then after that is the lesson on run-ons and comma splices. So I want to go through this list with you real quick, though, because they are groups of words or parts of speech that we use on a regular basis, but we don't necessarily remember how each of these words is supposed to function grammatically correctly within our sentences. And a little review of that can help you figure out where some of your errors are coming from in your writing, and then also how to fix them, right? So the first group of words are the coordinating conjunctions, all right? So coordinating conjunctions are used to connect grammatically equal items, okay? It could be a word, it could be words, phrases, clauses, or complete sentences that are alike and equal, right? You can begin a sentence with a coordinating conjunction, although you've probably been told many times when you were younger that you're not supposed to start your sentence with one of these words. But if done correctly, it is acceptable. It's okay. So what we're going to focus on with these words, though, is how to use them to combine or connect two or more complete sentences, right? So there's only 7 of them, and the acronym that's used to kind of remember them is FANBOYS, FANBOYS. But you'll see the list there. It's and, but, or, nor, for, so, and yet. So there's only 7 of these words. And if you look at the examples that I have there, there's 2 examples. Connor ate a lot of turkey for lunch, comma, but he managed to devour a whole chicken for dinner. So what we have there is we have 2 complete sentences. Connor ate a lot of turkey for lunch. He managed to devour a whole chicken for dinner. Those are 2 complete sentences that could stand alone, separated from each other. But we don't like to just have those short sentences standing on their own all the time. We want to combine our thoughts, and we want to let our reader know why we went from the first sentence to the second sentence. What was our point? What connection were we trying to make between these 2 complete thoughts? Well, coordinating conjunctions is one of the ways you can show your reader how they're connected. Obviously, since there's only 7, you have to make sure that using any of them would be appropriate, that the one you're choosing correctly expresses the relationship between the 2 sentences. But as long as that part is correct, then you're fine to use one of these words to combine those 2 complete sentences. You'll just need a comma to go with it, right? So that's why it's Connor ate a lot of turkey for lunch, comma, but he managed to devour a whole chicken for dinner. The second example, Jim studied hard for the test, comma, and it paid off, right? So just a little refresher there about the coordinating conjunctions. If you think about what the word coordinating means, when you coordinate things, like if you coordinate an outfit, you're taking equal pieces, like your pants are just as important as your shirt, right? A lot of people, your shoes are equally important. Every element of your outfit is equal, right? So when you are coordinating your outfit, you are coming up with a way of putting these equal parts together. So that's how I always remember what a coordinating conjunction is for. It is to combine equal things, right? Just don't forget to use the comma with it, comma and. That doesn't mean you have to use a comma anytime you use one of those 7 words. Only if you're using that conjunction to combine 2 complete sentences. If that's how you're using one of those words, then you use the comma with it, right? So the second list here is subordinating conjunctions. But I want to, all right, so this list, there's quite a few that are listed, and that's not even all of the subordinating conjunctions that are out there. But I want to point out some of the ones that we use most often. You'll see some of these are part of our everyday vocabulary almost all day, every day. Although, because and although are probably the 2 most common subordinating conjunctions. Even though, if, since, though, unless, until, whenever, while, whether or not. So we use these words on a regular basis. We probably do not really remember how they function though, right? The first thing though is that they are conjunctions just like the first list. So conjunctions, we are combining things together again, right? Except this time it's not coordinating them, it's subordinating them. So if you think about what the word subordinate means, it means to be less than, right? If you are someone's subordinate, it means you have less power than they do, right? So that's one word that I want us to think about is the word subordinate. A couple other things I want us to think about before I get into how these words function. Think about what we call complete sentences, other ways that we can refer to a complete sentence. The most common way that we can refer to a complete sentence is calling it an independent clause. What that means, if you think about the word independent, something or someone who is independent can stand on their own, right? So that is what we mean by that. An independent clause is a clause that can stand on its own. If it can stand on its own, that means it's a complete sentence, right? But then we also have something called a dependent clause. A dependent clause is dependent on something. It needs something to go with it. It cannot stand on its own. It is not a complete sentence yet. Even if it has a subject and a verb in it, there's something about it that makes it unable to stand on its own. So that means you have to make sure it is connected to the stronger item that it goes with. That's what's happening with these words, the subordinating conjunctions. When you use one of these words, you take what would otherwise be a complete sentence and you turn it into a dependent clause. Now it has to be connected to the complete sentence it goes with. So let's look at the examples, and that might help, make a little more sense of this. Don't show up for my Halloween party unless you're wearing a costume. So a lot of times in our writing, we would make the mistake of writing it like, don't show up for my Halloween party, period, unless you're wearing a costume. And it looks like that second sentence could stand on its own, unless you are wearing a costume. That looks like it could be a complete sentence. We've got a subject, we've got a verb, it makes sense, right? But because we used the word unless, we turned it into a dependent clause, and it can't stand on its own anymore. It has to go with the sentence that it is paired with. Sometimes it's the sentence you wrote before it. Sometimes it's the sentence you wrote after it. If you were really kind of frantic with your thoughts while you were writing, I guess it's possible that the sentence it goes with might be, a few sentences before or a few sentences after. But more than likely, the thought that it goes with, the sentence it goes with, is right next to it, either before or after it. So in this case, the dependent clause came after the independent clause. Don't show up for my Halloween party. That can stand on its own, right? That's the stronger of the two. So in this case, we wanted to just leave it like that. We don't need a comma. We don't need anything separating it. It's just don't show up for my Halloween party unless you're wearing a costume. Period. Sometimes, though, we will see that the dependent clause comes first, which is the second part of the first example. Unless you're wearing a costume, don't show up for my Halloween party. When that dependent clause comes first, you'll see a comma separating the two. So unless you're wearing a costume, comma, don't show up for my Halloween party. You don't typically see the comma when the dependent clause comes second. It just, the complete sentence flows right into the dependent clause. When it's reversed, the dependent clause comes first, then you'll see a comma separating them. Just a little detail to be aware of. The second example here, Jim did well on the test because he studied hard. So Jim did well on the test. That's our first complete sentence. Because he studied hard. Again, it looks like it's a complete sentence. He studied hard. That would be a complete sentence. However, we tacked on the word because. Now it's a dependent clause and it has to stay with the stronger one. Jim did well on the test because he studied hard. We can reverse this order as well. Because he studied hard, comma, Jim did well on the test. And I bet you, almost every single one of you have heard from teachers in the past that you are not allowed to start a sentence with the word because. That is not true. The reason that so many teachers, especially in elementary, junior high, and high school, the reason that so many teachers will tell you not to start a sentence with the word because is because we don't do it right. What we end up with is because he studied hard by itself. That's wrong. So instead of having to fight it over and over again, a lot of teachers are just like, no, you can't start your sentence with that word. You can, though, obviously. That second part of the second example, because he studied hard, comma, Jim did well on the test. That is perfectly acceptable. You are allowed to use these subordinating conjunctions to start your sentence. You just have to make sure that you have it connected to the stronger part, the stronger partner, so that it is correct. What we run into is we don't remember that it has to be connected to a complete sentence, and we leave it hanging out there by itself, and now it's wrong, right? The third example, I could tell he was having a good time, although he never said so. I could tell he was having a good time. That's the first sentence. Although he never said so. Looks like it could be a complete sentence. He never said so. But we put on the word although. We turned it into a dependent clause. Now it has to stay attached to the other sentence. You can reverse this order as well. Although he never said so, comma, I could tell he was having a good time. So please look over this list of words. And you don't have to memorize the list. I would become familiar with the ones that are used really often, but you don't have to memorize all of them. But just what I would try to remember, though, is what these words do, how they function, how to use them correctly, right? These will, if you understand that, not only will it help you fix the mistakes that you might run into in your writing, but it will actually eventually help you create more diverse sentences in the first place, right? You'll start doing it correctly the more you practice at this. Then it's not fixing your mistakes, it's actually then just producing better writing from the get-go. That's our ultimate goal. But at the very least, you want to make sure that you understand where the error is when you come across one, right? The third list of words there are what we call conjunctive adverbs. So some common ones that are on this list, let's see, certainly, finally, furthermore, however is probably the most common conjunctive adverb. Likewise, nevertheless, otherwise, specifically, therefore, thus. Those are two pretty common ones as well. So a lot of words that we use pretty frequently on this list as well. But what makes this list different from the other two? The other two were conjunctions, coordinating and subordinating. They were connecting things. We're doing that here too with conjunctive adverbs. The difference, though, is that these words show the relationship between two independent clauses. So if you remember what an independent clause is, it's a complete sentence. It's independent. It can stand on its own. So now we're dealing with two complete sentences, and we're using one of these words to show how the two thoughts are connected. But by using one of these words, we don't weaken either of the sentences. They still stand on their own. So let's just look at the examples. That might make it a little more clear. Tim wanted to dance the jive. However, Eileen wanted to dance the polka. You'll see I have these two sentences in 4 different combinations. Each combination using the conjunctive adverb, however. So in our first version, Tim wanted to dance the jive, semicolon, however, comma, Eileen wanted to dance the polka. So 2 things here. If you broke those 2 sentences up, Tim wanted to dance the jive, however, Eileen wanted to dance the polka, the way it is in the second example, that still stands. Just because we put the word however at the beginning of the second sentence doesn't weaken it. It can still stand by itself. So you can have a period after the word jive and then have the second sentence starting with the word however. Perfectly acceptable. The first version, though, with that semicolon being used, that is how you will often find a conjunctive adverb used. What a semicolon does, if you don't remember, is it combines 2 complete sentences. It allows them to remain together as one technical sentence, but it's 2 complete thoughts. The semicolon is strong enough to do that, right? So when you see a semicolon or when you use a semicolon, there should be a complete sentence on one side and a complete sentence on the other side, right? When you're using a semicolon, you're basically telling your reader these 2 sentences are so closely related, they're so connected that I want to keep them together instead of separating them into 2 individual sentences. So that's why you will often see the semicolon used with a conjunctive adverb, because a conjunctive adverb gives us that close connection. These are the words that express a direct relationship between 2 complete thoughts. So you will often see semicolon, conjunctive adverb together, and everything still remains in the same sentence. If you wrote it that second way, though, 2 independent sentences, Tim wanted to dance the jive, period. However, Eileen wanted to dance the polka, perfectly acceptable. The word, however, did not weaken the second sentence the way the subordinating conjunctions do. You can kind of switch up where you want to put, why is that on my tongue? Where you can put the conjunctive adverb. It doesn't necessarily have to be the first word of that second sentence. So you can do Tim wanted to dance the jive. Eileen, however, wanted to dance the polka, right? So take a look at that list of conjunctive adverbs. Familiarize yourself with the ones that are used most commonly, and you'll recognize them. You'll see the ones that we use a lot. Again, no need to memorize them, just a good idea to memorize how they function. So I'll be referring back to these groups of words in the lessons, especially on sentence fragments and run-ons and comma splices. But it's here for you to refer back to and familiarize yourself with They will help you as you learn how to identify these grammar errors and then how to fix them as well. But if you have any questions about this specific handout, feel free to let me know. Otherwise, just go ahead and move on to the first lesson on sentence fragments, and you'll see how these words come into play for that lesson.